Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Politics. Today we're doing Chapter 8. Um, we're moving away from the discussion of mastery, and now we're going to be dealing with another question, I think, about getting goods, which, as I said, Book 1 was about the introduction to politics. Chapter 1 saying what politics was versus what it wasn't, right? It defined it. Chapter 1, we defined it's about achieving some good and some benefit, right? It's about and that the natural community of fulfillment, it's a community, and that it is the most authoritative community, the highest and most authoritative community, and what it differs from, and he raises the argument. It starts out people those who argue that kingship, mastery, household management. Political rule and kingship are the same thing, just only the size of the unit is differs. He dismisses that, saying that no, these are different things of different kind. This then gets in a discussion in chapter 2 of a discussion of the what is the nature of koinonia, what is the nature, and he starts twofold, that of genetic argument, and then the of reproduction, sexual reproduction. The second one is the rule of those who have foresight versus those who lack foresight. In other words, we come together for two reasons. One is the genetic argument that we need to reproduce, but then we also, therefore, this is how we bond. And we also bond for the sake of some of benefit, and that benefit is also because the one who has knowledge versus one who doesn't. The rule of the force. And then he gives the whole argument of the nature of the city and why it does. Then he goes on to the discussion of, well, what is the household? What is this? That the household is, in other words, the polis is an association of parts. Well, what is the most essential part? And that's the oikos, the household. And then what is the household? If we have to define what the household is, right? But then, and in fact, this is the remaining of what book 3 is the finding of what is the household, right? But and at first he says the household is a series of relations, that of master slave, husband wife, parent child. And then he had a discussion of chapters 4, 5, and 6 and 7 about mastery, about slavery and mastery. Instead of turning to wife and child now, he turns to the question of the getting of goods. Because this he ends the last chapter on the distinction between, well, the science of slavery is not about the science of getting slaves. It is knowing how to run them, and it's not a noble science. It's not something that's really high. It's something low. In fact, most people rather give it to their servant to do, not to themselves, because it's tedious and it deals with knowing what the slave should do. It's not about, and that therefore the question of what is the art. Therefore, he mentions this art of getting, this art of acquisition, right? Getting goods, acquisition. And this is what about this? What about this? So this, and therefore therefore this is kind of in many ways a deviation from what he's already. In other words, he structured this way. Now we're getting a whole discussion about the art of getting. But this would be a very important thing. This digression is going to be very important in the sense, because this is the political economy. This is the basis for the nature of how the household and how the city itself will operate. Because of the question of, because in order to live, we need goods. We need to sustain ourselves. We need sustenance, and the sustenance is from our labor and our activity. So therefore, this is the way of resources and consumption. Therefore, this is a part of politics, the part of element. So let's continue here in chapter 8. But let us examine generally, in accordance with our normal sort of approach, possessions as such and the art of getting goods. Now, this is 33. This is the term. The term rendered expertise in getting goods is krematikis, from krematica, material, goods, no good things, no, goods. Aristotle uses the term here in several distinct senses, which is critical to distinguish. As a neutral or general term equivalent to expertise in acquisition, as a positive term, the activity of satisfying natural human needs. In a negative sense, the unnatural act of money making. So he uses this concept of getting goods in three ways. This is things of just material goods, the positive act of satisfying natural needs, and at the same time, this as money making, artificial act of things. Um, Newman, you should go check Newman's from a discussion. At the risk of some confusion, I have translated the term as the art of making money wherever it clearly bears the negative sense. And this is Politics 1 8, chapters 8 and 11 is the most important discussion of what we today call economics, not only in the works of Aristotle, but in all of the ancient literature. Okay, this is C. Mecky's classic 1994 Aristotle on economics. So let's go back to this in that sense. Okay. Sorry. So therefore, this is about the art of getting good. Since the slave turned out to be part of one's possessions, okay. In other words, because the slaves are possessions. So because how do you get possessions? What are possessions? And what are their purpose? Okay. Um, and because the slave is a possession, okay, in the sense that. So therefore, this is the question. In the first place, then, one might raise the question whether the art of getting goods is the same as household management. So that's the question: is household management the art of getting? Is the art of getting goods is economics, right? This is the irony. The word oikonomikos, which we get the word economics, is about the management of the household. Oikonomikos, which is economics, we the term we label economics was originally meant the management of an estate, okay, and the krimenistica, in the sense of getting things, is what we understand it, and we do in many ways we do conflate. This is the problem. We conflate two things that are not the same thing. Economics is we assume economics means it's merely household management, or economicos means literally only the art of getting things, making things, the market, right? The market, how we understand the trade, and how do we are able to exchange and to get something. This is the nature of modern economics, is this reductionistic confusion of these two different things. Um, so therefore, this idea that is this art of getting the same as household oikonomikos, a part of it or a subordinate to it, and if subordinate, whether it is so in the way the art of making shuttles is to the art of weaving, or the way the art of casting bronze is the sculpture. Is the art of in other words is the art of getting things the same as the household management or the economicals? Or is the relationship between the two the one that this is a technical thing, a subordinate thing, like the art of, in other words, the art of making a shuttle that becomes part of weaving? In other words, you need the shuttle in order to weave, but it's the two different. It's a subordinate thing. Like the example of bronze casting, knowing how to cast the bronze versus sculpting, right? These are two that one is a subordinate thing that assists the higher, but it's not the same. He's trying to suggest. For these are not subordinate in the same way, but the one provides instruments, the other the matter. Okay, so therefore this is in other words, the first one, this one, these two things, the art of making shuttles for the weaving, this is making an instrument, and this one is the casting of the bronze is doing what? It's the creating the matter. So you can have two ways of subordinate arts. One creates an instrument which is a tool to do something, and the creation of the matter that you are dealing with. By the matter, I mean the substance out of which some work is performed. For example, wool for the weaver or bronze for the sculptor. So therefore, I'm going to, in other words, the shuttle is the thing that weaves, the instrument. The wool is the thing that's being weaved to make textile. So therefore, this is the matter, the instrument and the matter. And there is this idea of the subordinate creating of the matter that is to be used, or the tool that is to make as well. So therefore, this double sense. Now it is clear that household management, oikonomikos, is not the same as the art of getting goods, for it belongs to the latter to supply and the former to use. So, in other words, economics is subordinate to household management. Economicos, household management, is superior to the primitas, the art of getting goods. The art of getting goods is to supply. Wait a minute. Woo! Economics is about using. Again, this is radical. Aristotle's flipping economic would argue that in other words, Aristotle's critique of modern economics is that modern economics flips what economicos, takes the name of economics and applies it to the getting, and only reduces it to the getting, and forgets the using of it and why things are used. It doesn't care. Actually, modern economics doesn't care why it's used or for the purpose it's used. It's only that people want it. And so, how do you get it? How do you get what people want? How to maximize the efficiency of getting what from supply to demand. Right. This is all about making sure that those who want something can get it, and the means of more efficiently delivering and knowing what can be gotten. Not about how to use it and what purpose it is to be used for. Okay, so therefore, that's the kind of critique Aristotle would give here. Let's continue. Uh, Supply and form use, and what is the ex? No, and what is the expertise that uses the thing in the house, if not expertise in household management? In other words, so the economicos, the economicos, the one who is expert or knowing about what is the thing that should be done in the household, is concerned with, and this is the one who is the one who's using the things. In other words, what expertise that uses the things that in the household, if not this, right? But whether getting goods is part of it or different in kind is a matter of dispute. Okay, this is the whole point, right? This is the matter of dispute. Whether it's different, is it part of it, or is it different in kind? For if it belongs to the expert at getting goods to discern how to get goods and property, and if property and wealth encompasses many parts, one must consider in the first place whether expertise in farming is part of the expertise of getting goods, or different in kind, and whether this is the case with the concern with sustenance generally, and the possessions concerned with it. Sustenance means being able to sustain yourself. So this is note 34 here. This is again reading a chemic with the minister within the conjecture of economates of expertise in houseman adopted by Drennan. So he's sticking with this. He's not. He's avoiding Drennenzer's correction here. This is why the note is there in that sense. So what is he saying here? He's saying that. Well, let's think about this. What is he's saying here that in other words, that property is about, it's about getting property, and the property and wealth are compassed in many parts. We had we had a size alteration here. We had a size alteration here. Okay. So, in other words, whether farming expertise is farming is a part of expertise of getting good. In other words, or is it something else? In other words, is farming this kind of a part of this, but is farming a separate science? In other words, okay, it seems that at one level farming is a separate science than the art of getting something, but many ways is not right connected with it. And he continues. In other words, whether this is the case or concerns of sustenance generally, and the possessions connected with it. In other words, this is, farming is a means of getting sustenance, right? It's the getting of the goods that are necessary in order to live, to survive. And therefore, this is the question: is it connected with it? Is it? And he goes, there are indeed many kinds of sustenance, and therefore many ways of life, both of animals and of human beings. So he's tying the idea that there's the way you get your sustenance shapes your way of life, how you live. This is the connection here now. He's saying that possession. He had this idea that this is the art of, is farming tied to getting goods? Yes and no. Yes, it's farming is a kind of sustenance. It's tied to what? How do you get your sustenance? How do you get the the things that you do in order to sustenance means the things you need in order to survive. How do you get them? How do you possess them? Okay, and he says, therefore, he says that this is, and that the different things of sustenance will shape, will affect the way of life both of animals and human beings. For it is impossible to live without sustenance, so that the difference in sustenance have made the ways of life of animals differ. So therefore, you can't live without sustenance. So how you get your sustenance will define the way you live your life. And therefore, different animals will need different types of things. They need different sustenance, and because of how they get their sustenance, will shape how their way of life, their character, their behavior. Right. For of beasts, some live in herds, others scattered, or whichever is advantageous for their sustenance, on account of some of them being carnivorous, some herbivorous, and some omnivorous, right? Carnivorous means the eating of herbs, right? And the omnivorous, yeah, I mean, this is both plants and animals, right? Omnivorous means, I mean, this means they only hunt animals, hunt, they eat live creatures. These are the eating of plants. These are the eating of both plants and animals. So that it is with a view to their convenience and their predilections, in other words, in these matters, that nature has determined their ways of life. So therefore, what is convenient for them and what is their tendency towards predilections is uh, their way of doing it in that sense, that the choice that the preferences, right? We would say in different languages, the predilections or preferences, their convenience. What makes it easy? The convenience means what is their ease of doing it. What's the easiest way of doing it for them? So what is the thing that they do? Okay, to get sustenance. Their for their in other words, the way they can get sustenance easily, the most simplest, easiest way, and what is their preferences towards in these matters, that nature has determined their way of life. So, in other words, nature says determines their way of life is tied to how they gain. The nature has designed them in regards to their preferences and the way they're easy to get, the easiest way that they have with regarding to their capacity to get sustenance. Okay. Um, uh, uh, and because of the same thing is not pleasant to each kind of animal according to nature, but different things to different kinds. Among the carnivores and the herbivores themselves, their ways of life differ from one another. So therefore, in other words, the way you live your life, the way you get your sustenance, the way nature has inclined you, and the way you need to get your sustenance, this leads to different ways of life, and that therefore and that then these ways of life are not identical, or maybe even they're different to each other. They differ from one to another, right? That themselves, their ways of life differ from one another. The same is the case for human beings as well, for there are great differences in their ways of life. So therefore, he's going to talk about the different types of things. The idolists and nomads, they drive their sustenance from tame animals without labor and amidst leisure. So therefore, nomads who are doing that, they sustain their lives from tame animals, herd animals like sheep, goats, and things like that, without labor and amidst leisure, though as it is necessary for the herd to move about on account of their pastures, they are compelled to follow along with them as if they were farming a living farm. So these are nomads. These are the people who are nomadic creatures. Um, they're farming a living farm, he says here. Now, nomads are interesting because they're hunter gatherers. They're more advanced hunter gatherers. Hunter gatherers are simply just those who hunt and gather, right? This is the anthropological. Hunters are the people who hunt for their animals, and gatherers are the people who gather the nuts and berries. Human beings are omnivores, and therefore they eat meat. So the hunters hunt the meat, hunt to get food, uh, 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 and the gatherers do this, and they have to follow the food. So therefore, they move around. They don't have a specific territory. They follow their food. They're different from nomad. Nomadics are what they tame their animals. So therefore, the hunter gatherers or people like Indians who hunt wild animals, they're hunting wild. They're not, whereas the nomads tame their animals and they follow like shepherds. Okay, so therefore, this is the difference between hunter. That nomads are not hunter gatherers. They have in other words, they've tamed them. They take the animals and tame them, and they move because they need pasture. They need to go feed their animals. They live. They're farming. It's kind of agriculture, but they're farming this living herd, a living farm, right? Um, they're compelled to follow among them, right? And from others live from hunting, and different sorts from different sorts of hunting. Um, um, so therefore, hunting, and therefore the different types of hunting, right? So therefore, living farm. The first one is the nomads hunting, and then he says for some live by of this is hunting, some brigandage. Okay, this is that weird word here, piracy. The term encompasses robbery on land and sea, piracy, right? This is that some live by piracy. This was the hunting of humans, and others from fishing. So hunting, different types of hunting. The two extremes: one is hunting of men and hunting of the fish, different types. If they dwell near lakes, marshes, rivers, or a sea that is suitable, others others from birds or wild beasts. So therefore, what they hunt will differ from what they hunt. So first is a one is category one is nomads, two hunting, but then hunting first of humans, piracy, then of fishing, and then birds and wild beasts, right? And but the type of human but the type of human being that is most numerous lives from the land and cultivated crop, agrarian, most numerous. So farming, living from the land and cultivating a crop, agriculture. So this is the next stage. This is the type of life. This is the classic hunter gatherers, then therefore nomadic, then the agrarian, right? The agrarian living off the land, living off the cultivating of the land to do this. The ways of life are then about this many, or at least those which involve self generated work and do not supply sustenance through exchange and commerce. So therefore, the ways of life in this natural sense, a simple sense, of this. Now we're going to repeat it. The ways of life of the nomad. So one, two, the farmer, the brigand, the pirate, the fisherman, and the hunter. Right. So notice that before this is, I talk about this in the notes. I note here. Aristotle first gives us. It starts out with a nomad. Second, it goes from hunter to a pirate, fishing, and then birds, and then farmer. Right now, he has this. He says, "Well, we're not going to do exchange or commerce, which is again trade or retail." Some people say the second word here is exchange, trade, and then commerce, retail trade, right? Um, but rather, first, the way of the nomad, way of life of the nomad, the farmer. So the last becomes up there. The nomad, the farmer, the pirate, the fisher, and the hunter. Hunter, he separates brigand, fisher, hunter, where in the original account, the hunter is a division of which hunting of men, hunting of fish because they're near seas, then birds, and then wild beasts. Right now, the middle is now put at the end here and is divided separately. And is giving actually even is the order the same? Yeah, it's the order is in fact hunter is referred to the general category, right? So therefore, what was really three now becomes five. Actually, three with one having four inside of it, the middle having four subcategories, now has this. Okay, so that's interesting in that sense. Um, there are some There are also some who live pleasantly by combining several of these in order to compensate for the shortcoming of one way of life, where it happens to be lacking in sufficiency. In other words, if you can't get one way of life, you can combine two ways of life that are perfect. So you can, uh, um, actually, that's the Vikings, aren't they? Nomads and not nomads, but fishing and piracy. Fishing and piracy, brigands and that, or maybe farmers and brigands, or hunters and brigands. In other words, hunting and nomads. If one is if one of these ways of one of these choices is not sufficient, you engage in another to make it sufficient. Some are combined in that sense, right? And where it happens to be lacking in sufficiency. I mean, sufficiency means that it's you get a satisfactory level that you're able to live your life, to live, to survive. Okay. For example, some combine with nomads with brigands, and some farmers with hunters, and some similarly with others as well, as they pass their time in this manner that needs, together with pleasure, compels them to do. So now this is 36, and I think this notes here. This is semena canis from Newman. This is that line of what is meant by this. Compels them to do that nature. In other words, time in the matter that needs together with pleasure. This is that line because this is this word here. It's a combination of necessity and pleasure. Compels them to act. Now, a property of this sort is evidently given by nature itself to all animals. In other words, I'm compelled to do this both by pleasure and necessity to do this. Right? I have to. This is the self-sufficiency that it's aimed at. Given itself to all animals, both immediately. In other words, this property of this sort is evidently given by nature itself to all animals immediately from birth and when they have reached completion. Therefore, when they animals get it like at birth or when they reach completion, and then they're able to have this ability to get to sustain themselves. It means to sustain themselves. Okay. Um, For at birth, from the very beginning, some animals provide at the same time as much sustenance as is adequate until the offspring can survive itself. For example, those that give birth to larvae or eggs, while those that give birth to live offspring have sustenance for these in themselves for a certain period, the natural substance called milk. Okay, so I'm talking about the eggs, things that you lay an egg, and then once the egg is born, the child has, it's able to have to get external sustenance. They're kind of able to start getting sustenance, eating, picking. Whereas the one live birth, often they require milk, right? This idea of natural sustenance that's retained within each of them. It is clear in this similar way, therefore, that for grown things, as one must suppose both the plants exist for the sake of animals and that other animals exist for the sake of human beings. The tame animals, both for use and sustenance, and most, if not all, of the wild animals for sustenance and other assistance, in order that clothing and other instruments may be gotten from them. Now, he has a note here, 37. This is with the manuscript rather than punctuated and supplemented. But again, Lord kind of doesn't agree with Denzizer's choice. He tends to go with the original manuscript. I'm more sympathetic with the Denziner in this sense. I think he's not all wrong. So therefore, what is, let's go move this up here for a second so I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to go backwards for a second. So therefore, this is that line. In other words, that as plants, animals, the relationship between plants and animals, and human animals, all as that they're useful for them for their sustenance, or necessary and useful for them, and that tame animals and use animals in double sense for use and sustenance, wild animals for sustenance, but also in other assistant use because you hunt other animals for their clothing or other instruments. Okay, they have use also. Even wild animals have use. They get from them. In other words, if then nature makes nothing that is incomplete or purposeless, nature must necessarily have made all of these for the sake of human beings. In other words, this is a kind of if then. This is if nature. This is that line that nature does not do a thing that does not make that from earlier chapter. Again, this echoes the point, and in fact, it is here when he discusses these things, we get a kind of repeating of chapter 2 of book 1 about the naturalness argument. But we get the naturalist argument kind of developed here at this moment because this is a very interesting thing because he's talking about sustenance, the way we have to live our body, our animals, we're like animals. He gives the analogies from animals. And therefore, there is this sense that we need to have this level of sustenance in order to do it. So therefore, there's this connection that there is this nature has made a purpose that there's a reason in nature. In other words, if everything is in other words, if it's not, if you're going to say everything is accidental, and that this is, in other words, has no meaning. Aristotle does not want to go that far. He says, listen, if nature makes nothing that is incomplete or purposeless, nature must have made all these things for the sake of human beings. Now, what happens if it's purposeless? They're not for the sake of human beings. Okay. See, it's an if, it's conditional. And I think this is what he wants. That's a question. It's an inherent question in Aristotle here, that he offers us to think about. Because, but at the same level, he wants to say, no, let's assert that it is. This is the necessary to make sense of the world. You have to assume that this is this way. Otherwise, everything is coercion, and everything falls apart, and everything's held together by force, then that you know okay, this is a necessary precondition by which that we can understand, we are able to operate within the world, in a world that is not horrendous. Okay? Now, next paragraph, and this will end this paragraph here. Hence, the art of war will be, in some sense, a natural form of acquisitive art. So, therefore, remember those things we talked about, those five things? We talked about nomadry, farming, piracy, the hunting of men, in a sense, the um, um, fishing, and the um, uh, hunter, um, hunting animals. Um, these are the natural mechanism of acquisition. The unnatural one is, well, this is what nature inclines. What's not natural is money making and trade and money making. This is he would say this is an artificial. This is something man will do. Man creates this, and it may be emergent. And I would argue maybe Aristotle might make the argument that it's ultimately emergent, but he's also arguing that it's artificial in a sense, um, particularly in terms of money making, interest making. This becomes really artificial in that sense. He's a little suspicious of this. But now he turns, hence, the art of war will also be, in some sense, a natural form of acquisition of art. For one part, it is the expertise in hunting, which should be used with both with a view both to beasts and to those human beings who are naturally suited to be ruled but are unwilling. Okay? That's interesting, right? Those who are to be ruled, in other words, they're dangerous, or they're maybe because they're dangerous and they're threatening, and they need to be ruled. They need to have some order on them. They're like wild beasts in a sense. They're like both the beasts and human beings. They are to be ruled but unwilling. This sort of war being just by nature. So therefore, it's natural. In other words, the waging of war against those who are beasts or those who are refusing to obey. In other words, who should be ruled. The hunting of men. The hunting of men who need to be, again, that's the slave, right? The argument of slaves. Those who this is that this idea of the hunting of men. This is tied to this. Not, and actually, it's interesting that piracy and war is more natural than money making. Okay, this this is this leads to no ends of hysteria on some people's part. Um, and this war being just, in other words, that this waging of war against those who are suited to be ruled but are unwilling. This is a very interesting point here. This sort of war is naturally just. The unwilling. By here, they're like beasts. They're like beasts who are destructive to the orders of others, the safety and well-being of others. In other words, it's not that. So now 13, one kind of the acquisitive art then is by nature a part of household management, and must either be available to be supplied by the latter, also to be available. The art of acquiring those goods, a store of which is both necessary for life. So it's, in other words, these things are necessary for life and useful for the community of a city or a household. Now 38, the rendering. This is the rendering of the manuscript with then ahoy of this. And he says, I understand kermeton in 29 to depend on Christus. So this is explanation of his why he's translating. And I think this is where maybe there is an alternative understanding of this, In other words, this idea that these things are both necessary for, in other words, these goods, these things of these natural gettings are necessary both for the what is necessary for life and useful both for useful for the community, a city, a polis, and a household. At any rate, it would seem to be these things that make up for general wealth. Wealth here is plutos, enough wealth. For sufficiency, now this is 39, autarkes ine, often translated as self-sufficiency, but the primary meaning here and throughout is discussion is having enough, not being independent. And I think that's right. This is why you have to understand self-sufficiency is having enough. Having enough in order to live. Having enough in order to survive, in order to live well, too. This is the highest well. For sufficiency in possessions of this sort, with a view to a good life, is not limitless. So Solon asserts it to be in his poem. Of wealth, no boundaries lie revered to men. And again, this is 40. This refers to Solon's fragment that we know. We don't have also. This idea that sufficiency in possessions of this sort is viewed to a good life is not limitless. In other words, his argument is that inside nature there's limits. It's not limitless. Again, this is why we have. Again, we know this is true in the sense because of Pareto's discussion of Pareto optimality and the ideas of diminishing, diminishing margin, the problem of diminishing margin utility. Anything natural, you're going to confront the problem that more isn't always good. It brings the same benefit. This is the concept in economics and things about the law of diminishing marginal returns or marginal utility. But there's a certain point you're trying to do more, you don't get the same equal benefit from it. At a certain level, there's going to be you're going to reach optimality point of utility. That's not Pareto's optimality, or Pareto optimality moment. But this is you get the most benefit to effort. And at a certain level, the more you try effort you do, the more you do it, you start getting less and less return, less and less benefit from it, to the point where all of a sudden you start getting negative benefit if you keep on doing it. Okay, this is the famous discussion of how many of you have had that tequila moment. You've had so much tequila that you never want to touch again. Okay, the same problem is with like candy. You've had too much candy, and then you can never. The smell of candy makes you sick from this point on. You understand? This is the problem of that you did something, you used a good or a benefit to a point that it no longer produced benefit. Now any usage of it now brings negative. Therefore, you've used so much that you went over a crossing line, and the pain that it brought now, the negative response to it, the memory of the negative response to it, now is completely associated with that. This is what he says about nature. This is why nature is not, the natural things are not infinitely benefit. There's no wealth, it's no, of wealth, no boundaries lies revealed to men, right? This is his warning. Wealth is that's artificial. Therefore, this is the danger. That therefore, in nature, sufficiency and what is necessary for our good, what is sufficient, having enough in order to live, not only live, but also to live well. In other words, if having infinite doesn't make you necessarily mean you live well. Having infinite may actually cause more problems than living well in that sense. The goal is not having a lot, not acquisite. This is that famous line: "What is life? Make so much money that who at the end of his life dies richest wins." Right? Well, wait a minute. What happens? Your life is life really that of a life of a slave. You've lived all your life miserable, working, slaving to make the money. Really, you've never really able. You've slaved, you hard, you toiled. Now you might do this for the sake of others and the sake of your children and the sake of a thing. But the question: did you live well? Have you lived a life worth living? That's a question in that sense, Aristotle would say. And Socrates and Plato, all the classical political philosophy. In fact, this is what the argument here is that a, a good human person is not concerned with toil. A free person, a free man, does not labor. It is unfitting, unsuitable that he labors, because laboring is the action of the unfree. In other words, you're not maximizing your potential. There's some people who just don't have the capacity to of deliberation, of ability to know how to deliberate and know how to make discerns. People who have the capacity to do great things should do them, should engage in them, and not should be that they are bothered dealing with survival. And this is the problem, right? This is what happens, is that sometimes that we have to do this. This is the reality. This is the tragedy of politics, in that sense. That often people who should be in charge aren't in charge. They are really stuck in this everyday survival mode, whereas the people who have wealth and power are usually incapable of using it. In other words, it's not about having wealth, it's about using it and to what end you use it for. And the use should be for the benefit, not only for your benefit, but for the benefit of your community. In other words, this is the idea. Oh my God, you're collectivist. No, no, no. Again, use. What is the purpose of use? Living well. You're to live well. And you're living, and because human beings are social animals or political animals in the sense they need each other, and they cannot simply just live. I cannot live well unless I'm a god or a deity who doesn't need anyone else. You need other people. And if everyone else around you is miserable, to what degree are you going to be able to live with them? You're not going to be able to live with them. You're going to be unable to live with them. You're not even be able to be friends with them. They're going to be, in other words, this massive inequality of situation gets to a point where they don't even look like your fellow human beings. In other words, if all of a sudden the wealthy and I mean, that's what's so wonderful about the third volume of the Stanley Kim Robertson's The Moon Trilogy, where all of a sudden this is something even noted in the second volume, that all of a sudden that science and technology gives the wealthy the ability to live these very, very long lives. They're healthier. They're better. The poor live very short lives. Their access to food, health, and these things give their lives shorter, and they don't have as much wealth, and therefore, in other words, their families don't possess things, they don't own things. Whereas these wealthy people will own a lot, and their health will become. What ends up happening here is an evolutionary divergence. Whereas all of a sudden, these people will be almost a subspecies. In other words, a subspeciation will happen in this sense. And this is some of the worry that someone like this is the fear that what Charles Murray and his bell curve and also coming apart is worrying about. Why this idea that we become so, that the wealthy get so wealthy that they no longer have nothing in common with the rest of their fellow community people. This is the danger in this sense. Right? So let's continue. In other words, there is such a boundary, just as in the other arts. For there is no art that has there is no art that has an instrument that is without limit, either in size, in number, or in size. And wealth is an aggregate of instruments belonging to the household manager and the political rulers. This is a very important thing to understand. Wealth, what is meant by wealth? In other words, there is such a boundary, a natural boundary, just as in the other arts. For there is no art that has an instrument. So wealth is an instrument, not an end. It's an instrument, a means to an end. An instrument is always a means to an end, not an end in itself. That is without limit, either in size, number, or size. And wealth is the aggregate of instruments belonging to the household manager and political rulers. So wealth is what an aggregate of all the instruments of use for the sake of living, Wealth is for the sake of living. Not only survival, possessions, and means. This is the Greek word. This is why we'll talk about this later. Prios is the means to live, the means of necessity thing. Not only necessity, but also the means to live. Not only lives meaning survival, but also maybe means to live well. Okay, so that there is a natural art of acquisition for the household manager and political ruler, then is and the cause of this is clear. In other words, the idea of a natural. What is a natural? The natural art is concerned with living and living well. It is this natural art is this, and the unnatural art doesn't care with it. It what it does is it divorces the ends. In other words, it takes the instrument of the means and turns it into an end. The mere acquisition for the sake of acquisition. That the instrument, the purpose of an instrument, when it is for use. It's in other words, it's here to be used. It is not an end or a thing that it is not. It is not to be substituted for the way of life. If you turn the instrument into the way of life, now the argument is, well, but didn't you say that the ways of sustenance define the ways? Yes, it does, and this is the problem. That what happens is that there's some ways of life that are beneficial and good for a animal, and other ways of life that are detrimental. Therefore, this is the idea that therefore the unnatural, if you take the unnatural means of acquisition and turn it into the way of life, but not as a means so that you can get the resources in order to live well, but rather to turn the itself into what? Endless money making, endless wealth, acquisition of wealth for the sake of, in other words, wealth for the sake of wealth. The quoting Strauss's line about Locke, the joyless quest for joy, right? In other words, the pursuit of happiness, but it's the end. It's the we pursue happiness, but instead of being happy, we pursue happiness, but we don't are not happy. We pursue happiness, so we pursue it, but don't possess it. This is, in fact, maybe that's that famous line in Natural Right and History, which talks a lot, is that not only also attack on Jefferson's tweaking of life, liberty, and property to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. To pursue happiness in this way is to turn an end into turns a means into an end in that sense. The pursuit of something that you cannot obtain. Wait a minute, pursuit of happiness. Okay. Yeah, that's a big question, is it? That's a big issue. I mean, I'm going off here, Locke. Declaration here because isn't happiness a better choice than property? Isn't that kind of an Aristotelian understanding of it, and therefore that by pursuing property, but it's not pursuing happiness; it's being happy. In other words, happiness is the end, yes, and so therefore you pursue an end. But it is the end by which you're going to measure something. Happiness is a state that you are able to fulfill yourself, fulfillment of this. Whereas that these natural rights is that you have a right in Locke. It's life, liberty, and property are the defining things of justification, right? So, okay, that's either here that's Locke, but let's talk about this. What is these natural acquisition? It is these means by which we are able to that the city or behoove us in order to live and live well. We're going to stop here. We'll look at the next chapter in our next session. If you have any questions or comments, please put them below. If you've, if I see them, I'll respond to them when I see them, not if. When like, if you liked it, dislike. If you don't like it, say why. If you have some criticism, um, if you want to follow me, you subscribe. Get others to subscribe. Please share this channel with other people, your friends, and other people that you might think would be interested in this. Um, you can follow me on social media below. I often in Facebook. I do Facebook is my kind of like my blog. Sometimes I come up with ideas about things and points, but I don't. I should be more public in that. I should have the public one. I don't do that. I'm afraid sometimes I've been burnt before, so I put everything on secret. So any friends, I do that. But you can follow me on social media. I should have another. So I have a. I used to have a funny page. It was called the. I have a public profile. The rogue philosopher, something like that. Which I probably should tweak and do this. Um, what else? Um, you can follow me on social media below again, say like that, or you want to help me somehow contribute that I continue these things and able to do this. You can do so with a subscribe star or Patreon below, or you can just simply just go to if you want to if you don't want to pay monthly five. Those things that those I understand that but you can go just buy my book. You can buy my other book. This book is published with Lulu, so it's Cliff Notes for politics. It's a notebook for Aristotle's politics, which is about what we're talking about. It deals chapter by chapter with a kind of study guide. This is not a commentary. This is not a interpretation. This is a study guide. This is like summaries and outlines and helping you to understand some of the difficult passages in the text. And therefore, would be useful in that sense of confronting the text. I have lots of space, so you can put notes in it, and then you have after every book, there's a place you can put comments. So this is please buy it. And you can buy it Lulu directly. I get more money if you buy it. I get money for Amazon, but it's not going to be as much. Amazon will make their profit. If you want to cut the profit of Amazon, send this directly to Lulu. But the problem with Lulu is they make you pay shipping, and I know why people don't like shipping. I understand that. Amazon. So therefore, that's it. Um, have a good day. Take care, and bye bye.